Good evening, everyone. I'm Daryl Steinberg, the mayor of Sacramento. I want to wish everyone a good Memorial Day. And today, I hope you all took some time, as I know I did, to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country and to reflect on the struggles we are all dealing with during the COVID-19 pandemic. For me, it provides some perspective when I think about the wars that we fought and the men and women who fought for our country and gave us our freedoms here today. We've gotten through some terrible times in our country with great loss. And we have the strength to get through what we're experiencing today. And in memory of all those who allowed us to have these debates about freedom and stay-at-home orders and what should be next, with great respect and reverence to all those who have served, and especially those who lost their lives. Tonight, I want to talk about a different subject, even though it is Memorial Day, and that is the issues of mental health in our community. We've talked about this several times over the last couple months. Tonight, I have a special guest to join me. He has served as a police officer and moved up the ranks, of course, mostly in the city of Sacramento, became the police chief in Roseville. And then in 2017, our community was fortunate enough to bring him back to where he was raised and where he started his career. He's been our police chief since 2017. Please welcome into the show here, so to speak, Police Chief Daniel Hahn. Good evening, Chief. How are you?
I'm good, Mayor. Thanks for having me.
It is great to be with you. So, Chief, earlier today, you and I went out to a beautiful equestrian barn in Elk Grove and saddled up. We actually got on the horses to highlight the use of equine therapy of horses to help teens dealing with emotional struggles. And then next week, in fact, later this week, you are going to help lead a teen mental health forum. And it is one of many mental health related leadership roles that you are taking in our community. I want to ask you, why do you feel so strongly about mental health?
Well, I think in our communities, when we deal with, as a police department, safety and crime and things, and a lot of that has to do with mental health, people's safety. So, as a police department, we don't really have a choice. When mental health crisis plays itself out on the street, the only people that our community knows who to call is us. And so our officers are going to respond regardless of where it's at or what's going on. Our police officers are going to respond. And so those are usually very tense situations. So we need to be able to handle them well, not only when we get called, but preferably that we can handle those mental health issues before that ever plays out in the middle of the street. And so to the extent the police department can help with that, we created a mental health team. We recently hired a social worker with the approval of council. And so that's one of her big roles, is how do we deal with ongoing mental health issues in our community? So preferably they never play themselves out in crisis mode in the middle of the street so a police officer doesn't have to respond.
So I want to get into each of those things in terms of how mental health affects policing and what the men and women who serve us deal with every day and experience every day. But I want to back up a little bit. Mental health, so you've decided in large part because you see this as such an integral part of what you do. You see its predominance in the community in terms of untreated mental illness and mental health challenges, that you've chosen as police chief to highlight these sets of issues as one of your priorities, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to talk about what we saw today, because it was real interesting. We think about mental health, the stereotype is, you go see a therapist, or you go see a psychiatrist, involves a lot of medication. And that's part of what treating mental health can be about. But we saw a creative approach today, and that is this horse therapy for young teens. What was that all about?
Yeah, as much as I am interested and concerned in mental health, I would never even come close to saying I'm an expert. So a lot of what I do is a lot of listening and asking the experts, what should we be doing? And I think we'll get into that a little bit later with teens. But today was the CBC Therapeutic Horse Riding Academy that we went out to that deals with mental health issues and just behavioral issues, and seems to be very successful amongst youth and adults. Today, I think they mentioned that their students are range from 4 years old to 72 years old. So to the extent that they can help with our teens and other groups that we're working with, we have been partnering with them and Impact SAC. So today was really my first time, and I believe your first time, just kind of going out to see what they do. And it was even more impressive than I thought.
Talk a little bit about the technique. What is the relationship between the horse and what a young person, for example, might be struggling with?
Well, first, I'd be remiss if I didn't say the woman in charge is a young African-American woman that has a master's degree. She was listing off all her degrees. There's a lot of them. And she chose to come back to horseback riding to utilize all that experience and training that she has. And so she works with the school districts and things. But her father talked about the relationship between the horse and the student or the rider, and having to be a leader for the horse and creating trust. And once you create trust, then you can get things accomplished. So today was the first day I met her father, and he spoke about some of the very things we talk about in the police department in regards to trust. And I think he related it very well, that if you can do that with a horse that doesn't speak the language, doesn't understand the language, and isn't a human, then you can do it with human beings with trust too. So that really stuck out to me, and the success. And he went over a couple of the stories of some of the student success stories that were very impressive, that how just what they go through with the horse and the training changes their lives.
You know, I was very impressed too, and I was especially struck by the description about how young people with anxiety, how this kind of therapy really helps them. Because if you're anxious and you overcome that anxiety by doing a really bold thing, which is to get on a big animal and to trust that you are going to be okay if you connect and relate to that animal in the right way. It was just sort of a beautiful thing to observe and to listen to, how the forming of that kind of relationship between the horse and the teenager actually serves to heal. So that was really good today. So Friday, I think it is Friday, you are hosting, and I'm proud to be a part of it, a teen mental health forum. What is that all about?
Yeah, just a little bit back a sec on the anxiety. You know, one of the things that the experts have told me is that there's a myth out there that the holidays are the most crucial time in terms of mental health issues and suicides. And in reality, we're kind of in that time. The April, May, and June is really a high time for mental health issues. And there's a lot of change with graduations. So people don't know what they're going to do next necessarily. So it's a high anxiety time. And then now you add in this health crisis that we're currently in, where graduations are canceled, where college students don't really know what the beginning of the fall semester is going to look like. And so you're just adding more anxiety, more stress into what is typically an already stressful time. And so in that, I think we'll talk about stats in a little bit, but we've seen multiple teen suicides over the last several months since the health crisis really went into full effect. And the level of crisis in our mental health calls that our officers are responding to is striking. And so we've been working with teens for a while through Impact SAC, who has a great relationship with teens throughout the entire region.
What is Impact SAC, Chief?
Yeah, Impact SAC is an organization that works with youth, that really prides itself on getting the voice of youth and understanding what youth need and want. And we held probably 3 or 4 months ago, we held a kind of a teen summit on mental health that you spoke at for a minute down at City Hall before we took them on our tour of the federal courthouse. And so we got a lot of good information there. And so this is really the next big event that we're holding with all the youth that want to sign up. They can still sign up. So that's this Friday at 7:30. It'll be held virtually. And the theme is really, if we want to help young people, the people that have a lot of the best ideas for helping young people is young people. And so we can guess at things, but it's been a while since I've been a young person. So, and things changed. We didn't have social media and things like that when I was their age. So we really want them to help and find the solutions and create what we're doing here as a teen advisory council for mental health and safety. So they give a lot of good information and have a lot of good ideas. So that's what we're doing this Friday. Any teen that wants to participate and has some good ideas, wants to participate in the dialogue, is more than welcome to go to impactsac.org/teens, and you'll register and they'll send you a login.
That's very good. The city, of course, has this $89 million worth of federal stimulus that the city council is going to begin shaping and debating over the next several weeks. And I know tomorrow we're going to seek to put forward some early investment. I think it's $250,000 for youth mental health. And so I would love that forum in part to be around, okay, how should we invest that kind of money? What would be the best way to educate and to inform young people that they're not alone when they're feeling down or they're feeling anxious, and how to reach out in a way that keeps them safe?
Yeah, and I think that would really give them the knowledge that they have a true purpose in this. And from what I've experienced from them in the forums that we've held already, they are very talkative. They are not scared to share their opinions, especially once they feel the trusting environment. And I think having the mayor and Councilmember Chenier and Impact SAC and various NAMI will be part of it, and Hope Cooperative will be part of it. So there's a lot of people that deal with this every day, that this is what they do every day. And so hopefully that sends a message to these teens that they are very valued in this effort, and they're really important to help us determine how we're going to help people their age to be safe and be able to address any issues that they have. I mean, it's always been a stressful time to be a teenager, and there's always been challenges with that. And so I just think we can get better at it.
No question. So, when I asked the first question about what motivates you to be a leader in this field, that frankly, a lot of leaders don't really want to touch because it's kind of messy, and there's a lot of that, I call it the S word, stigma associated with mental health. You said that, this is a big part of what you have to deal with in terms of your responsibility as police chief of a major American city. I want to get into that a little bit more, about the intersection between community, law enforcement, and mental health, and how you and your officers deal with this every day. Let's take the issue of homelessness, for example, especially homelessness among those with serious mental illness. What percentage of the overall police officers' overall calls for service involve the homeless problem in Sacramento, approximately?
Yeah, and a lot of times it's up to 30%, especially in certain areas. And so a lot of homelessness involves mental health issues and drug issues, oftentimes co-occurring. And so, a lot of we have to address those issues if we think we're going to make a long-lasting impact in the mental health field and just in the general population. I mean, you'd be amazed. You can't tell somebody that is having mental health issues just by looking at them a lot of times, but there's a lot of people out there that just one more thing might put them over the edge to being in crisis. And so our mental health team, put it this way, is extremely busy. We've had an increase over the last couple years of double-digit percentage increase in the number of calls, mental health related calls that our officers respond to. This year so far, through about mid-April, we had double the number of suicides that we've had the last 2 years. We average 34 mental health related calls for service a day, every single day of the year, and it continues to rise. It's up this year to 35 calls a day. Last year was 34 calls a day. So it continues to increase, and the health crisis hasn't helped any. It's exacerbated the issue.
So let's break that down just a little bit, because I asked about homelessness, but you're not just talking about homelessness. You're talking about the so-called 5150 call, somebody living at home, a family member is having a psychiatric issue, and the police get called to come. Talk about, well, first of all, how do you break it down? Are most of the mental health calls those kinds of calls? Are they homeless related? Are you called out to schools where there's trouble? How would you break down that 34 or 35 a day?
Well, they're a little bit of everything. So sometimes the homeless related calls is somebody just acting out in the middle of the street. So acting abnormal, or like today, there was somebody tearing down a sign in people's fences. So people will call. Sometimes it's family members calling on a son, a daughter, a husband, wife that they feel is in mental health crisis and is in need, but they don't know who to call. So they just call 911. So our officers respond. So it's a little bit of everything. Mental health is one of those things that you can't say you're one segment of society, so therefore you don't have to worry about it. It crosses all economic boundaries, all race boundaries, all gender boundaries. It comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors.
So what training do your officers receive to deal with this? Because this isn't necessarily, quote, law enforcement all of the time. It can just be responding to a family in crisis, even if there's not been a violation of the law. What is the training?
Yeah, I would say that's one of the areas I think as a society we can get better at. I think a good portion of the calls we respond to, we are not necessarily the ones that should be responding, but we're the only ones there right now. And we're the only ones that people know how to call. But our officers, all of them get a 40-hour course in mental health training with scenarios and things. Then there's update training. And then, of course, we have our mental health team that goes through much more training than that responds out to calls. The chronic individuals in our community, they try to go out there and connect them to services. So they're very closely tied to the service providers in our community through the county or the nonprofits, those organizations like NAMI. So they get quite a bit of training, but I will say the other issue is that a good segment of our officer-involved shootings have a mental health thread to them. And so one of the things that I think we've gotten a lot better at as a police department is the initial response when the person's in mental health crisis. Maybe they pose a danger, maybe they have a weapon, maybe they're, threatening people or something like that. We've gotten a lot better at that with training and tools that council has provided funding for, different less lethal pieces of equipment that quite frankly get used every day in our community. But the part where we created the mental health team was for is what I don't think that I think we can get much better at is then what? Once we get that situation that's in crisis calmed down, then what? If this person doesn't get the help that they need, if the family doesn't get the help that they need, we're probably going to be there again tomorrow. And every time one of those crisis situation plays out, there's a possibility for something bad to happen. Somebody gets hurt, that person gets hurt, an officer gets hurt, officer involved shooting, or those sort of things. So that was the purpose of the mental health team and why I think we need to get good information from the teens and work with these organizations and figure out what else is needed. Because, at one time, we didn't have 911. But now you could ask a 2-year-old what 911 is, and they'll know what that is, and they'll know what they get when they dial it. But if you ask somebody, who do they call if their loved one is in mental health crisis, they're going to probably say 911 also, when a lot of times that's not the best number. And so one, I think we could get better at making it well known, like 911, who do families call? And then two, there's always a stigma. Flat out in our society, in our community, do not treat mental health like a broken leg. Nobody would hesitate to take their child to an emergency room or a hospital if they broke their leg. But it's a much different story if one of our loved ones has a mental health issue. And to me, they need to be very similar so we get the people help that they need.
You mentioned the mental health teams a couple of times. I think a lot of people in the public may not know exactly what you mean. How many people, well, first of all, compared to how many officers we have in Sacramento. How large is the mental health team? What exactly are their duties?
Yeah, great question. So we have just under 700 officers right now. We have 3 or 4 officers on the mental health team with a sergeant and a social worker, and they work very closely with the organizations that deal in mental health. So I've ridden with them a couple times and watched them go into houses and connect people right there to the services and check. And they clearly have a relationship with the folks that they're going to check on. Hey, have you talked to your counselor? Have you done this? And working with their family. So it works well. We could probably use 50 more of them with the level of the issue is in our community and all communities across our country. But it's our way of trying to prevent it from becoming a crisis out on the street or in somebody's home, as opposed to getting them help sooner before they get into that crisis mode.
So you have we have 3 or 4 teams, right? So that's several officers.
3 or 4 officers.
3 or 4 officers.
Yeah. And they're citywide, so they go all over the entire city.
Got it. And 34 to 35 calls a day. They're obviously don't have the capacity necessarily to address every one of those calls that are coming in on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, the vast majority of those calls are handled by patrol officers.
All right. And they have the minimum training, but they're not necessarily they don't necessarily specialize in the way that the 3 or 4 officers do, correct?
Yeah, they don't have the additional training that the mental health officers have, and they don't have the relationships and the knowledge, the intimate knowledge of working with these organizations every single day.
Right. You know, I've long said in my mental health advocacy that I actually think we put the men and women of the police department oftentimes in an unfair situation, that you are the first resort and the last resort, when what we really have is a systemic set of failures around a mental health system that is more responsive to families. So if you were to design it now from scratch, from what you see on the ground, how would you design it differently? What kind of outreach or response would you substitute, if you will, for what the police department has to do on a daily basis?
Yeah, and I would say I'm not the expert on that. So I would, the details on how to do these things, I would really rely on the people that have the training and deal in the field every day. But from what I can tell, there's some general areas that I think we could get a lot better at. One is the stigma. And it can get worse or better depending on what community you're in. But there's definitely a stigma when it comes to mental health that prevents people from getting the help that they need. So I think there's a lot of times people don't get the help even though they know something's wrong. But if it's in your head as opposed to a body part like an arm or a knee or something, there's some stigma to that. And then the other one I mentioned earlier is, who do they call? I mean, I see a lot of these situations where I don't know if they would have called if they knew who to call. So I think that's one of the things I always liken it to 911, because the advertising and the information about 911 is so good. Everybody knows what 911 is, and they know how to dial it. They know what they get with it. So if we had something like that for mental health issues, that would help along with the stigma. And then I just think in regard to response, I think there's a lot of calls that police officers respond to that they shouldn't be responding to, as you said, and that they're probably not the best people to respond. Obviously, anybody that there's violence involved or potential for violence, in my opinion, an officer needs to respond to make sure things are safe. But a lot of these calls don't involve that. And so some counselor or some clinician I think would be much better to respond to something that doesn't have a violent aspect. And then some of this feedback we've gotten from teens already, I thought it was pretty interesting. One teen comment I heard through the Impact SAC site is they asked, who would you feel comfortable talking to? And they said, I'd feel comfortable talking to somebody my age, so another teen, but if I needed help, I would talk to an adult. So it kind of struck me with their words that we need both. And so maybe one of the things that these teens are going to come up with, my guess, based on that comment, is a lot more teens need to be involved in the services. Maybe there's teen counselors and things, more of them. And then there's adults to help with connecting to big services or something like that. But I know that's a teen that said that. And it struck me that, that maybe that's one of the things we need more of.
We sure do. I mean, in the mental health area for adults, the peer movement is really very, very important and strong. In fact, for a long time, we've been fighting to get the state and the federal government to actually fund peers as providers, right? Because they can be the best providers. Why don't we start something like that with our teens here in Sacramento? Maybe we use some of this money to provide stipends, part-time jobs, for example, for Sacramento teens who become trained to be peers, you know?
Well, I hope some of them are listening to their mayor say that right now so they can get those ideas in their head. I think that would be great based on what I've heard some of them say.
Did I just make a commitment to fund a teen program? I just might have. Why not? I want to go back to this issue of stigma because you've used the word several times. And I know the definition, I think most people do. It is the fear and embarrassment of being associated with or being labeled as somebody with a mental health issue. And as you said, you know, we don't hesitate if we have a diabetes or we have a broken limb to express that. But if you're suffering from depression or have a mood disorder, most people will not reveal that. And that's part of what we're trying to break through here in our society as well. But I want to ask you about stigma and the communities of color that you know, maybe the African-American community specifically. How pronounced is stigma in some of our communities in Sacramento?
Yeah, I think all communities are nuanced, so this wouldn't be every single person, but I think in the African-American community, there is a large stigma in regards to mental health. Again, if somebody breaks their arm, nobody has an issue with getting help for that. But if it's somebody that seems like the issue is in their brain or in their head, there's a lot of hesitancy. And I would say that goes for probably a lot of people. And I think it goes in different, at different levels, but you know, you imagine if you broke your leg, you probably wouldn't be concerned about a future job or something like that. But if you checked yourself into a mental health facility, you might be concerned about getting certain jobs if that was, you know, revealed that you checked yourself into a mental health facility. So I think there's a lot of concerns from a lot of people in a lot of different areas that we really should address, because to me, there's a lot of people with mental health challenges and a lot of people that don't get help for them. And if they get help, I don't see why they couldn't almost have any job as long as they were better now. I mean, I look at it like you're going to be able to walk again if you break your leg because you put a cast on it and it heals. And so if we look at a lot of the mental health issues in the same way, maybe more people would access the services. But for sure in the African-American community, in my opinion, the stigma is rather large.
So let me, you just said something interesting that makes me want to follow up here. So if you had an applicant to the police academy who self-revealed that they had a history of depression or even a mood disorder, but that they were being treated, that they were more than stable, they were living a good and normal life, but they had to deal with these sets of issues, how would you react to something like that?
That is a very good question. I can tell you right now that we would give that a lot more thought than we would if they had broken their arm when they were 15. We wouldn't even think about whether they broke their arm. We'd be wondering why they told us that. But if they did say they had some sort of mental health issue, we would definitely be concerned about that. Absolutely. Fortunately for us, every one of our applicants go to a psychologist to have a test and checkup. So if that was the case and they were fine in that, and that psychiatrist said that they were okay to be a police officer, we would probably still hire them. But I guarantee you that would be a concern over what a physical ailment would be. Absolutely. And
yet you wouldn't automatically disqualify the person. You'd want to know a little bit more about it. Is that a fair?
Yeah, it's like a lot of other things, like even with drugs or some of the other things that comes up in a lot of backgrounds. it's really the context. How long ago was it? What are you doing now? Is it a habitual thing that keeps occurring, or is it something that you learned from and got better? So I would say mental health is the same thing, although these are kind of new areas. So I guarantee you a lot of us, including me, would be more concerned about that than if it was a physical ailment. But at the same time, we would treat it like, okay, so how are you now? What has happened in the meantime? And then what does, when you go through the process and go see a mental health professional, what do they say? Because they're going to address that. They're going to talk about that. So
Right.
if that comes back and say they're good to be a police officer, then we hire.
That, and I'm glad you got to that point, because that's where I knew you were heading. And I appreciate the honesty too, because the easiest thing to say would be, "Oh, it wouldn't matter a bit to me," but you didn't say
No.
that. And
Oh no.
I think that's honest, right? Because we have to confront it here a little bit, and we have to talk through these things. And I think you just did a very nice job with that. So we're to the half-hour mark, and we got a few more minutes. And I'd like to end this by actually getting a little bit personal here with you, if you don't mind. I want to go back to what motivates Daniel Hahn here, aside from the fact that you're the police chief of a major American city and you're dealing with these issues. Your men and women are dealing with these issues on a daily basis. A lot of people know the outlines of your life story, that you grew up in Oak Park, that you were raised by your mom. You were adopted, I believe, correct? And she moved you to Oak Park, and she was a wonderful mother. I know she passed away just a couple of years ago. I know I had the chance to meet her very briefly, and I know that she was a wonderful woman. And you refer to this, you refer to this in different ways over the years, but I'll just put it the way I've interpreted it, that you were a teenager who had some attitude. Is that a fair way to characterize you?
Well, my mom's not here to contradict me, so I was a perfect child. No, I didn't get into any like major problems, obviously, that would prevent me from being a police officer, but I had my fair share of run-ins. I got arrested when I was 16 for assault on an officer. I witnessed some violent things in the community. Just being adopted is a challenge a lot of times with, mentally in your head. So yeah, I didn't get good grades a lot of my youth, and there was a lot of challenges with, let's just say my mom had more challenges with me than any of my siblings.
Okay, so at one point, your mother, as you have told me, took you to a psychologist, a mental health professional, because she was worried about your mental health. What happened?
Yeah, I think my mom was probably at her wit's end of what to do with me, because my grades kept getting worse. And, again, I was a good kid, but I just kept doing things opposite of what she wanted and probably were in my best interest. So I think it was probably just, let's try something different. So she told me, because my grades were not good, that we were going to go see a psychiatrist at Kaiser. And so we were fortunate that my mom had medical insurance and was a very educated person and very worldly, so knew that was a possibility and took me. It didn't go real well, but she took me when I was probably around 14, 15, or maybe even a little younger. I can't remember. It was either at the end of junior high or beginning of high school. Right in my good, do everything your mom says years, those teen years.
Exactly. So why do you say it didn't go well?
Well, I didn't, she framed it around my grades. My guess is she might've had a couple other reasons for doing it also. My mom was a social worker, so she probably knew I was having challenges with other things, but verbally to me, she told me I was going because of my grades. And I didn't feel my grades were bad because I had any mental health issues. I felt my grades were bad because I didn't like school, and I didn't care. Well, not that I didn't like school. I didn't care enough about my grades to get good grades. So then when we got there, I didn't really connect with the psychologist or psychiatrist where he was. He did not come across to me very well. I did not like him at all. And so I gave him a lot of attitude. So my mom took me twice, And at the conclusion of the second one, he told my mom that I'm not talking, that I'm not participating, and that she's probably wasting her time taking me to him.
So you and I have talked a little bit about this. You look back on that time period when it comes to seeking help, as your mother tried to get some help for you, and you turned out fine. You got through your struggles. Daniel Hahn.
Don't ask my wife.
Young Daniel Hahn. But this is important, though, to say this in this way. 14-year-old Daniel Hahn is having all kinds of issues, as many teens do. He sees a psychologist, even though it didn't really work out, so to speak. He still went. And now we sit here many decades later, and you are the police chief of Sacramento. That in and of itself, in my opinion, is a stigma buster. The fact that you're telling your story, and stories are so powerful because people would look at you today and say, well, what do you mean? You went to see a psychologist? What? You know, because of the stigma, they might ask all sorts of questions. And in many respects, what it really says is going to seek help is at once a big deal, and in another way, it's not a big deal. It's just going to seek help because you got whatever is going on in your life, especially as a teenager. What would Chief Daniel Hahn say to 14-year-old Daniel Hahn, let's say the 5 minutes before the young Daniel Hahn walked into that psychologist's office decades ago?
Yeah, I had a very special relationship with my mom, and I pretty much hung on her every word, although I never let her believe that. And so at the time, she probably did not think that was the case, but it was. I was your true definition of a mama's boy. Matter of fact, my grandfather always called me a mama's boy. But I think I do two different things. And the first one, I don't know if it would have worked, but I would have expanded why I was going to young Daniel Hahn, because I think my mom saw other issues besides my grades. My grades were the result of other issues I was having. I was struggling with being adopted. And I won't go into too many details. We don't have enough time. But for years in my 14, 15, 16-year-old self, I struggled with being adopted. I struggled with all sorts of things surrounding that. So, and I think my mom, well, I know my mom knew that. She tried many things in regards to that. And so I might have expanded the reasons why I was going to this psychiatrist. I don't know if I would have listened to that at that age. My other nickname was Hardhead. So I don't know if I would have really listened, but that might have helped. Probably the bigger thing, though, is I didn't click with that psychiatrist from the very beginning. I thought he was talking to me like I was a 2-year-old. I'm sure he was very skilled at what he did, but we just didn't connect. And from that point on, now me looking back, there's nothing he could have said after that first probably 5 minutes that we met that would have brought me back into the room mentally. I was done. He would refer to my mom as mom. I think I even told him one time, she's not your mom. Why are you calling her mom? Her name is Mary. She's my mom. I call her mom. I mean, so that's how petty I got in that room. And so I think it's just because he irritated, the things he did and said just didn't click with me. So I would say maybe if, tried somebody else or something like that I clicked with more, I might have been more open to talking. But, I really didn't, I think part of being adopted is the only person I trusted in my entire life was my mom. So to think that a psychiatrist could come in and gain my trust in like 15 minutes was probably nothing that was ever going to happen.
So maybe to broaden the question away from your experience, again, I think it's so powerful. I just want to commend you for just being open and telling the story, because that to me is the thing that opens the door to busting stigma. We all tell our stories. My family has told its story. People tell their stories. It normalizes these sets of issues, because what we realize is that while the perfect family may not have any of this going on, in fact, every family has something going on, and that we're all part of a human family that deals with all of these issues in one way or another. And certainly COVID has brought that up, right? Everyone's feeling a little bit depressed at times or anxious, and it is part of the human condition. But let's end it this way. So what is your overall message to the Sacramento youth who are struggling? If a teenager is thinking that life has no meaning because they didn't get to celebrate their graduation, if they feel that that they have no friends because they're not able to get together in the ways that they used to get together, if they're feeling like, oh my God, that life isn't worth it, they might even be thinking about taking their own life. What's your message to the young people of Sacramento?
Well, first of all, I think social media exacerbates our issue, because I always laugh when I look at people's Facebook and things, and we always put our best foot forward on Facebook, like we're the ideal families and we're the ideal friends. In reality, it's not. You go behind that, it's not really that. There's issues, they're not perfect. But also we see a lot of bullying on Facebook and Instagram and social media. So I would just say to the teens out there, they're not alone. First of all, they're not unusual. They're not the only person going through things like that. And, kind of like this too shall pass, if you reach out to your friends or reach out for the help, like some of the organizations on the screen, like you just have to get through this moment. And then you can get help for some of the things that are challenging you. Teen years have always been tough years. And so in general, I want to just say there's help out there that is not judgmental, that nobody will know about, that they can access. And then for the more immediate, like what's happening this week and what's going to happen on Friday, is we need their help. My brain still tells me I'm young, but my body definitely tells me I'm not. And so we need young people to help us solve this. We need young people to tell us what would get rid of the stigma amongst teens, what would get fellow teens to access resources, what would get fellow teens to talk to each other about some of these issues. One of the questions Impact SAC asked is, have you ever seen bullying on social media? And if so, what did you do? And who did you call? And things like that. So teens are a big part of this. And we have to do better with our teens, help the schools, help the counselors, and build up the resources that are accessible and there's no stigma. So that's going to take a lot of work, but I know we're not going to do it without our teens.
Well, I really look forward to May the 29th and that conversation, to listen to not only the stories of teens, but also, as you said earlier, they're very specific ideas about how we might spend some city resources and how we might do a better job helping teens spread the word. And I'm sure that's going to be a great hour together. Chief, I want to thank you for your time and for a great discussion tonight. Any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you for having me, and I appreciate your for a long time now, your focus on mental health, because again, it cuts across all segments of our community, and it's a significant issue, and I think we have the ability to do better.
And maybe its time has come. I sure hope so.
I do too. Thank you.
Talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank
Good night.
you. Good night.